The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of my Beacon Hill townhouse, and I watched my husband's mistress step over the glass in her Louboutins like she owned the place. "Madeline," she said, smiling that practiced smile I'd seen her use on donors at every charity gala for the past 3 years, "we need to talk about the twins." That's when I knew my brother Tommy had finally made his move, and everything I'd built in this glittering Boston prison was about to burn. My name is Madeline Hartwell, and 6 months ago, I was living the kind of life women's magazines write about: penthouse overlooking the common, husband who ran the most prestigious wealth management firm in New England, twin daughters who attended the same private academy where Kennedy children once played. I threw parties where senators mingled with tech billionaires, wore dresses that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and smiled until my cheeks ached while my marriage rotted from the inside out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the morning it all started to unravel, the morning I discovered that sometimes the people who smile the brightest are sharpening their knives in the dark. It was a Tuesday in September when I found the first photograph, not tucked away in some hidden drawer or buried in a phone, but sitting right there on the kitchen counter next to my morning coffee, like whoever left it wanted me to find it. The image showed my husband James and a blonde woman I didn't recognize, their heads bent together over drinks at the Bristol Lounge, his hand covering hers. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds before I heard my daughters laughing upstairs, getting ready for school, and I slipped the photo into my Hermes bag without saying a word. I'd learned a long time ago that the first person to react is usually the first person to lose, and I wasn't about to lose anything without a fight. "Mommy, Charlotte took my hair ribbon again." Emma's voice rang down the stairwell, high and indignant. At 7 years old, my girls were mirror images of each other, all dark curls and gray eyes like my mother's, like mine. They had no idea their father barely looked at them anymore, too busy building whatever fantasy life he'd constructed with his mystery blonde. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heels clicking on the hardwood, and found Charlotte sitting on her bed with the ribbon tied around her teddy bear's neck, that little smirk she got when she knew she was being difficult. "Charlotte, give your sister back her ribbon." I kept my voice level, the same tone I used when negotiating with gallery owners or deflecting questions about James's late nights at the office. She unwound it slowly, making Emma wait, making me wait. Even at 7, she understood power in a way that sometimes frightened me. I wondered if she'd learned it from watching her father or from watching me pretend not to notice when he came home smelling like someone else's perfume. "Thank you, sweetheart. Now both of you finish getting ready. Mrs. Chen's waiting downstairs with breakfast." But here's what I couldn't shake as I drove them to school that morning, watching them in the rearview mirror as they argued about whose turn it was to sit in the front seat tomorrow. That photograph wasn't random. Someone wanted me to know about the affair, wanted me to react, wanted me to do something stupid, and the only person who'd ever cared enough about destroying my life to orchestrate something like that was my brother Tommy, who'd been waiting 20 years for me to fall from grace ever since I'd married into money and left him behind in the old neighborhood. Tommy showed up to my door that evening, right as the girls were finishing their piano practice. I heard Consuela, our housekeeper, answer the intercom and then her hesitant voice, "Mrs. Hartwell, your brother is here." I told her to send him up, then went to the bar and poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan because I knew I'd need it. He walked into my living room like he was casing it for valuables, his eyes taking in the Rothko on the wall, the custom Italian furniture, the view of the city lights spreading out below us like scattered diamonds. "Nice place, Maddie. Really nice. Must be hard, keeping all this together." "What do you want, Tommy?" I didn't offer him a drink. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since I'd refused to invest in whatever scheme he was running out of a warehouse in Dorchester. He was my older brother by 3 years, and he'd spent every single one of those years resenting me for getting out, for marrying into money, and leaving him behind in the old neighborhood. He sat down anyway, sprawling on my cream sofa in his cheap jacket and scuffed boots. "I know things. I know James is screwing around. I know his firm's got some shady investments that might not look so good if the SEC came sniffing around. And I know you're sitting here playing the perfect wife while your whole world's crumbling." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" That's when I realized this wasn't just about the affair. Whatever Tommy had planned, it was bigger than catching James with his mistress. He wanted something from me, and he was going to use my marriage as leverage to get it. "Get out of my house," I said quietly, because the girls were just down the hall, and I didn't want them hearing this. He stood up slowly, that familiar sneer pulling at his mouth. "You always thought you were better than me, didn't you? Just because you married some rich prick and learned which fork to use at dinner. But you're still Maddie Sullivan from Southie, and you're about to remember what that means." He walked to the door, then turned back. "When this all comes crashing down, and it will, don't say I didn't try to warn you. Family's supposed to stick together, Maddie. You forgot that a long time ago." After he left, I stood at the window and watched the city lights blur through tears I refused to let fall. I'd worked so hard to build this life, to be someone other than the scared girl whose father drank away every paycheck while her mother worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. I'd made myself into Madeline Hartwell, wife of James Hartwell III, mother of Emma and Charlotte, member of the Junior League and the Museum of Fine Arts Board. And now my brother was threatening to tear it all down because I'd had the audacity to want more than the life we'd been born into. What I didn't know then was that Tommy had already set things in motion. The photograph was just the beginning, the first crack in the foundation. He'd been watching us for months, documenting James's affair, gathering evidence of financial irregularities at the firm, building a case that would destroy not just my marriage, but everything attached to it. And he was working with someone on the inside, someone I trusted, someone who'd been in my home and smiled at my daughters and pretended to be my friend while feeding information to the brother who wanted to watch me fall. The next photograph showed up 3 days later, this time tucked into my yoga bag at the club. James and the blonde again, but this time they were leaving a hotel, and the timestamp showed it was from last Tuesday, the same day he'd told me he was working late on the Pemberton merger. I took it to the locker room and locked myself in a stall, my hands shaking as I studied the image. She was younger than I'd thought, maybe 30, with that casual elegance that comes from growing up with money. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her, and that bothered me more than anything. "Madeline, you in here?" The voice belonged to Victoria Ashford, my so-called best friend, the woman who'd introduced me to James 12 years ago at a fundraiser for the symphony. I shoved the photo into my bag and flushed the toilet for effect, then came out smiling that same practiced smile I'd perfected over a decade of charity luncheons and society dinners. "Hey Vic, sorry, just checking messages." She was touching up her lipstick in the mirror, designer workout gear hugging a body maintained by twice-weekly sessions with a personal trainer I couldn't afford anymore, not after James had cut my monthly allowance in half without explanation. "Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Are you and James doing okay? I heard some things, and I just want to make sure you're all right." The concern in her voice sounded genuine, but I'd learned the hard way that in circles like ours, concern was often just reconnaissance. "We're fine. Why would you ask?" I kept my voice light, casual, like the question didn't make my stomach twist into knots. Victoria had never asked about my marriage before, never pried into the carefully constructed facade I presented to the world. The fact that she was asking now meant the rumors were spreading, meant people were talking, meant Tommy's plan was working. She turned to look at me directly, and something in her expression made my blood run cold. "Maddie, honey, I'm your friend. I'm trying to help you here. If James is doing something he shouldn't be doing, you need to protect yourself. Get a lawyer, secure your assets, think about the girls. Don't just sit there and take it." Then she hugged me, and over her shoulder I saw her phone screen light up with a text message. And even though I couldn't read it all, I saw enough. The name at the top said T. Sullivan. My brother was texting my best friend. My brother, who I hadn't invited into my life in 2 years, was somehow in contact with Victoria Ashford, and she'd been asking about my marriage with all the subtlety of someone following a script. I pulled back from the hug, my mind racing. Thanks, Vic. I appreciate you looking out for me. I should get home to the girls. That night, after I'd tucked Emma and Charlotte into bed and read them 2 chapters of the book we'd been working through together, I sat in my study and started making lists. Every person who'd been in my house in the past 6 months, every friend who'd seemed a little too interested in my marriage, my finances, James's work schedule, every moment that felt off, wrong, staged. And at the top of the list, I wrote Tommy's name in red ink, then circled it 3 times. He'd brought Victoria into this, which meant he had leverage over her somehow, which meant there were more secrets buried in my perfect life than I ever suspected. James came home after midnight, stumbling a little as he set his keys on the entry table. I was waiting for him in the living room, lights off, just the glow from the city outside. Jesus, Madeline, you scared me. What are you sitting in the dark? Who is she? I kept my voice steady, even though everything inside me was screaming. I'd practiced this moment in my head a dozen times, rehearsed the words until they felt smooth and cold as river stones. Who is she? The blonde from the Bristol Lounge, the one you've been meeting at hotels while you tell me you're working late. Who is she? We'll talk about it now, or I call my lawyer in the morning, and you can explain to the partners why your wife is filing for divorce right before the Grayson Capital deal closes. I'd learned his pressure points over 12 years of marriage, knew exactly which buttons to push. The Grayson deal was supposed to make him managing partner, set him up for the kind of wealth and influence his father had built, the kind he'd been chasing his entire adult life. He dropped into the chair across from me, and in the dim light he looked older than his 42 years, tired in a way that had nothing to do with late nights at the office. Her name is Sophie Lancaster. She's a client. It started 6 months ago at a conference in Miami, and I've been trying to end it, but she won't let go. She's threatening to tell everyone, to ruin me, and I don't know how to make her stop. The lies came so easily to him that I almost admired it. Almost. Try again, James, and this time don't insult my intelligence. I've seen the photos. I know the timeline. I know she's not just some clingy client. So tell me the truth or this conversation is over and my lawyer's filing papers first thing Monday morning. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Fear, maybe, or calculation. Fine, you want the truth? I'm in love with her. I have been for over a year. She gets me in a way you never did, Madeline. She understands my work, my ambitions, my goals. You're too busy playing society wife and spending my money to actually care about building something real. The words should have hurt more than they did. Maybe I'd known for longer than I wanted to admit. Maybe some part of me had been expecting this conversation since the first time I'd smelled unfamiliar perfume on his collar and chosen to ignore it. So what's the plan? You leave me, marry her, play house with your ambitious blonde while I raise our daughters alone? The girls stay with me. His voice was flat, final, and that's when I understood this wasn't a confession born of guilt or love. This was a negotiation, and he'd already decided what he wanted. Sophie and I have discussed it. She's great with kids, and let's be honest, you're not exactly mother of the year. You outsource everything to nannies and housekeepers while you spend your days shopping and having lunch with your vapid friends. Something cold and dangerous settled in my chest. You're not taking my daughters, James. Whatever else happens, whatever deals you think you can make with your mistress, Emma and Charlotte stay with me. He stood up, straightened his tie like we'd just concluded a business meeting. We'll see what a judge says when I show them the evidence I've been collecting. The drinking, the pills from Dr. Morrison, the times you've left the girls alone because you were too busy with your own agenda. I've been documenting everything, Madeline, every single mistake you've made. After he went upstairs to the guest room we both pretended he used for work, I sat in that dark living room and let myself understand the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just an affair. James and Tommy were working together somehow, coordinating their attacks, building cases against me from different angles. And Victoria was involved too, feeding information, playing the concerned friend while she helped them gather ammunition. They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But here's what none of them knew. I'd been planning too, Not consciously, maybe, but every survival instinct I'd grown up in Southie, every lesson I'd learned watching my mother navigate a world designed to break women like us, every bit of steel I'd wrapped around my heart to survive in James's world of old money and older grudges, they thought I was soft, decorative, easy to discard. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The next morning, I dropped the girls at school and drove straight to a law office in Cambridge, one that specialized in high net worth divorces and had a reputation for playing as dirty as necessary. The attorney, a woman named Grace Fitzgerald, who'd built her career destroying men like James, listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she looked up and smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me understand why James's colleagues were terrified of her. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm going to be very direct with you. Your husband is building a custody case, which means he's planning to go nuclear. The affair, the financial irregularities I'm guessing exist at his firm, the fact that he's coordinating with your brother, all of that suggests he's trying to neutralize you before you can become a threat. But here's what he doesn't know. Massachusetts is a no-fault divorce state, which means his affair doesn't matter nearly as much as he thinks it does. What matters is parental fitness, financial discovery, and who can tell the better story. Are you ready to fight dirty? I thought about Emma and Charlotte, about the life I'd built for them, about the future Tommy wanted to steal and James wanted to rewrite with me erased from it. Tell me what you need me to do. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a ghost in my own life. I smiled at school pickup, made small talk at the girls' dance recital, attended the fundraiser for the children's hospital like nothing had changed. But underneath, I was gathering evidence. Bank statements that showed James moving money to offshore accounts, emails between him and Sophie discussing their plans, text messages where Victoria admitted she'd been feeding information to Tommy in exchange for something I still couldn't identify. And most importantly, I documented every moment I spent with my daughters, every meal I made, every bedtime story I read, every scraped knee I bandaged, and homework assignment I helped with. Then the fire happened, and everything I thought I knew about betrayal got rewritten in smoke and ash, and the screams of my daughters trapped inside our burning house, while the whole neighborhood watched me stand frozen on the lawn, and my brother Tommy screamed those words that would haunt me forever. What kind of mother abandons her babies? You left them to burn. The fire chief, a solid man with gray at his temples and tired eyes, turned to look at me. Mrs. Hartwell, where were your daughters when the fire started? I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The girls were supposed to be at their piano lesson. That's what Mrs. Chen had told me when I'd called to check in an hour ago. They should be at Mrs. Kowalski's studio. She picks them up every Thursday at 3. Mrs. Kowalski called here 20 minutes ago saying the lesson was canceled. She said you'd rescheduled it. The fire chief's voice was careful, professional, but I heard the accusation underneath. I saw it in his eyes, in the eyes of every neighbor watching me. They all thought the same thing Tommy was shouting, that I'd left my daughters alone in a locked house and gone off to have coffee with my friend while they burned. Then the firefighters brought out 2 small shapes wrapped in blankets, and the world stopped. I heard myself screaming, but it sounded like someone else, someone far away. I felt my legs give out, but Victoria caught me, helped me up, whispered in my ear, "I'm so sorry, Maddie, I'm so sorry." And even through the shock and horror, some part of my brain registered that she didn't sound sorry at all. She sounded relieved. But here's the thing about well-laid plans. They only work if every player follows their script perfectly. And 7-year-old girls, even when they're terrified and confused, have a way of noticing things adults think they've hidden. While the EMTs checked the small wrapped shapes that turned out to be mannequins from the girls' dress-up closet, while Tommy performed his grief for the gathered crowd, while James arrived looking appropriately devastated, while everyone prepared to watch me arrested for negligent homicide, my actual daughters were sitting in Victoria's house 3 blocks away, exactly where Tommy had told her to put them after he'd picked them up from their canceled piano lesson. And my niece Lydia, Tommy's 8-year-old daughter who'd been watching from Victoria's backseat window, had seen her father throw something through my townhouse windows 30 minutes before the fire started. She'd seen the matches arc through the air, seen him run away, seen him come back later pretending to be a concerned brother. And when the fire chief walked past Victoria's car to move the crowd back, Lydia had opened the door and pulled on his coat and whispered the words that would unravel everything. "Should I tell you about the matches Uncle Tommy threw through the window?" The street went silent. Every eye turned to Tommy, whose face went from grief-stricken to pale to calculating in the space of 3 heartbeats. The fire chief crouched down to Lydia's level. "Sweetheart, are you sure about what you saw?" Before Lydia could answer, the back door of Victoria's Mercedes opened, and Emma and Charlotte tumbled out, confused and frightened but very much alive. And I watched my brother's entire plan collapse in real time as the crowd registered what was happening, as pieces started falling into place, as Victoria tried to start her car and flee but found 2 police officers blocking her way. The girls ran to me, and I dropped to my knees and held them while everyone watched, while Tommy started backing away, while James's face went from devastated to furious, because he understood, just like I did, that whatever case they'd been building had just gone up in literal flames. But the real revelations were still coming, and they were going to burn hotter than any fire Tommy could set. They took Tommy into custody right there on Mount Vernon Street, and I watched them put him in handcuffs while holding my daughters so tight I was probably hurting them. Emma was crying into my shoulder, saying she'd been scared, saying the man who looked like Uncle Tommy had told them it was a surprise for Mommy, that they were going to hide and then jump out. Charlotte was quieter, watching everything with those sharp, gray eyes, and I knew she understood more than she was saying. Victoria tried to leave 3 times before the police made her stay, made her sit on her perfect lawn with her perfect house behind her, while they questioned Lydia about what she'd seen. Captain Rodriguez walked over to me, his expression completely changed from 10 minutes ago. "Mrs. Hartwell, we need to take your statement, but first I need to know, did you have any idea your brother was planning this?" "No." The word came out steady, even though my whole body was shaking. "I knew he wanted to hurt me, but I didn't think he'd involve my children. I didn't think he'd go this far." What came out over the next 6 hours as investigators sifted through the wreckage of my house and detectives questioned everyone involved was a conspiracy so elaborate it should have been impressive if it wasn't so psychotic. Tommy hadn't just wanted to destroy my marriage or my reputation. He'd wanted me arrested for killing my own children, wanted me locked away for life while he collected insurance money from a policy he'd somehow forged in my name. He'd been planning it for 8 months, ever since I'd refused to help him with his latest scheme, and he'd decided I needed to be punished. But he couldn't do it alone. He'd needed James, who wanted out of our marriage but didn't want to lose half his assets in a divorce. He'd needed Victoria, who'd been having her own affair with James for the past 2 years, long before Sophie Lancaster ever appeared. Sophie Lancaster didn't exist, not really. She was a role Victoria had hired an actress to play, someone to leave a trail of evidence while Victoria played the concerned friend, gathering information and establishing herself as the stable maternal figure who could help James get custody. And he'd needed Mrs. Chen, our housekeeper, who'd been gambling away her salary at the Encore and owed Tommy's loan shark friends more money than she could ever repay. Grace Fitzgerald met me at the police station, where I'd gone to give my formal statement. She looked at me across the interview room table with something like admiration. "Your husband is trying to claim he knew nothing about the fire, says Tommy acted alone, that he was only planning to divorce you, not kill you or the girls." "That's a lie." I kept my voice level, empty. I'd cried all my tears while holding Emma and Charlotte. Now there was just ice where my heart used to be. James knew everything. He had to know. Tommy needed his money to set this up, needed his cooperation to move the insurance policies, needed his help keeping me distracted while they arranged everything. "Can you prove it?" Grace leaned forward. "Because right now it's your word against his, and he's got expensive lawyers already spinning a narrative about a troubled brother-in-law who became obsessed and went rogue."
I pulled out my phone and opened the email I'd been saving for exactly this moment. 3 weeks ago, when I'd first started documenting everything, I'd installed monitoring software on the computer in James's study, the same study where he thought he was having private conversations with Tommy and Victoria, planning their perfect crime. I'd captured everything, every email, every chat, every video call where they discussed timing and execution and how to make sure I looked guilty enough that no one would question the story. I can prove it. I forwarded the files to Grace's phone. I can prove all of it. The next 72 hours were a blur of lawyers and police interviews, and my daughters sleeping in my bed every night because they were too scared to be alone. James was arrested on conspiracy charges. Victoria was arrested for fraud and accessory to attempted murder. Mrs. Chen was arrested for child endangerment. And Tommy, my brother who'd spent his whole life hating me for getting out, was charged with arson, attempted insurance fraud, and 2 counts of attempted murder.
But the story that emerged as investigators dug deeper was even darker than I'd imagined. Tommy hadn't just wanted my money or my life. He'd wanted revenge for something that happened when we were kids, something I'd blocked out so completely I didn't remember it until he finally confessed. When I was 12 and he was 15, our father had gotten drunk and violent, worse than usual. He'd come after our mother with a broken bottle, and Tommy had tried to stop him, and in the struggle, our father had fallen and hit his head and died. It was self-defense, obviously, protecting our mother. But I'd been the one who called the police, and in my panic, I'd told them everything. And even though Tommy was never charged, the whole neighborhood knew what happened. He blamed me for making him a killer in everyone's eyes, for taking away any chance he had at a normal life. So all of this, I said to Grace during one of our meetings, everything he did, it was because I made a phone call when I was 12 years old? Trauma doesn't follow logic, Madeline, and resentment is like poison. It doesn't matter that you probably saved your mother's life that night or that Tommy was justified in defending her. He built a narrative in his head where you betrayed him, and he spent 25 years nurturing that grievance until it consumed him completely. I thought about that while I sat in the temporary apartment the insurance company had put us in, watching my daughters sleep. Emma clutched her teddy bear, the one Charlotte had tied my hair ribbon around all those weeks ago. Charlotte slept with one hand stretched toward her sister, like even in sleep she needed to make sure Emma was there. They'd been through hell because of decisions I'd made, choices I'd thought would protect them, but instead had put them in danger. The trial started in March, 7 months after the fire. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through James's affair, Tommy's threats, the photographs that started appearing, the web of lies and manipulation. Grace was brilliant, painting a picture of a woman trapped between a vindictive brother and a husband who saw his family as obstacles to overcome rather than people to protect. The defense tried to make me look like a neglectful mother, an ice queen who cared more about society parties than her own children. But then they called Emma and Charlotte to testify, and everything changed. The judge had initially ruled against allowing the girls to take the stand, said they were too young, too traumatized. But Grace filed a motion arguing that they were the only witnesses to critical parts of the conspiracy, and the judge reluctantly agreed to limited questioning. Emma went first, her small voice steady as she described how Mrs. Chen had told them Mommy wanted them to go with Uncle Tommy, how he'd seemed nice at first, but then had gotten scary when they asked to go home, how they'd seen Victoria's house and known something was wrong because Mommy would never send them there without coming too. Charlotte's testimony was different. At 8 years old, she had the kind of clarity that comes from being a child who watches everything and forgets nothing. Daddy told Mrs. Chen that Mommy wouldn't notice if we were gone for a few hours. I heard him. He said Mommy was too busy with her stupid friends to pay attention to her own kids. But that wasn't true. Mommy always pays attention. She knows when I'm lying about brushing my teeth or when Emma takes extra cookies before dinner. She knows everything about us. Daddy was the one who never noticed. I watched James's face while his daughter demolished his defense, and I saw the moment he understood he'd lost. Not just the trial, but everything.
His daughters knew who'd protected them and who'd endangered them, and no amount of expensive lawyers could rewrite that truth. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Tommy guilty on all counts, James guilty of conspiracy and fraud, Victoria guilty of fraud and child endangerment. Mrs. Chen took a plea deal and agreed to testify against everyone in exchange for a reduced sentence. When they read the verdict, I didn't feel triumph or relief, just exhaustion and a profound sadness for the family I'd thought I had, the life I'd thought I was building. Sentencing came 2 months later. Tommy got 25 years. James got 15, though his lawyers were already filing appeals. Victoria got 10, and she cried through the entire proceeding, claiming she'd been manipulated by both men, that she'd never meant for anyone to get hurt. I sat in the gallery holding my daughter's hands and listened to her lies, and I remembered how she'd hugged me at the gym while texting my brother, how she'd driven me to my burning house with my children hidden in her car, how she'd whispered "I'm so sorry" like she meant it while watching her plan succeed.
After it was over, after the reporters stopped calling and the neighbors stopped staring and the society pages found some other scandal to dissect, I sold everything. The townhouse on Mount Vernon Street, even after it was rebuilt, held too many ghosts. I sold the furniture and the art and the designer clothes I'd accumulated trying to be the perfect wife for a man who'd never valued me. I took Emma and Charlotte and moved to Portland, Maine, where nobody knew our story and we could start fresh. I bought a small house near the water, nothing fancy, with a yard where the girls could play. I got a job at a gallery in the Old Port, using the art history degree I'd earned before I married James and forgot I had my own dreams. Emma and Charlotte started at a public school where they made friends who didn't care about trust funds or society connections. We ate dinner together every night, just the three of us, and we talked about their days and their feelings and all of the things I'd been too busy performing my role as society wife to pay attention to before. One Saturday afternoon in June, almost a year after the fire, we were having a picnic on the Eastern Promenade when Emma asked me the question I'd been dreading. "Mommy, why did Uncle Tommy hate us so much? What did we do wrong?" I put down my sandwich and pulled her close, Charlotte scooting over to lean against my other side. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby. Sometimes people carry hurt inside them for so long that it turns into something poisonous, and they start wanting other people to hurt too. Uncle Tommy was angry about things that happened a long time ago, before you were even born, and instead of dealing with his feelings, he let them grow until they made him do terrible things. But you're his sister. Aren't families supposed to love each other?" Charlotte's voice was small, confused in the way kids get when the world doesn't match what they've been taught. "They are. And I think Uncle Tommy did love me once, when we were little, but sometimes love gets buried under so much anger and resentment that people forget how to find it again." I looked out at the water, at the sailboats dotting the harbor, at the sun sparkling on waves. The important thing is that we don't let that happen to us. We're going to talk about our feelings, even the hard ones. We're going to be honest with each other, and we're never going to let anger grow into something that hurts people we love. Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm glad we moved here. I like our new house better than the old one." "Me too," Charlotte agreed. "Nobody here cares if I wear the same dress twice." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. "Yeah? Well, nobody here cares if Mommy doesn't wear Louboutins to the grocery store either." We finished our picnic and flew a kite Charlotte had gotten for her birthday and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. And I realized something important. I'd spent 12 years trying to be someone I wasn't, playing a role in someone else's story, measuring my worth by standards that had nothing to do with who I actually was. Tommy's revenge, as twisted and horrible as it was, had freed me from that prison. He'd tried to destroy me, and instead he'd stripped away everything false until all that was left was the truth. I was a good mother. I was strong enough to survive, and I didn't need the money or the status or the perfect marriage to prove my worth. 6 months later, I got a letter from Tommy. It had been forwarded 3 times before finding me in Portland, and I almost threw it away without reading it. But Grace had told me that closure sometimes comes from unexpected places, so I opened it while the girls were at school, and I was alone in our sunny kitchen with coffee and the courage to face whatever he'd written. Maddie, it started, his handwriting the same messy scrawl I remembered from childhood notes passed in school. I'm not writing to apologize, because I know sorry doesn't mean anything after what I did. I'm writing because my therapist says I need to take accountability, and because I think you deserve to understand. I spent 25 years hating you for calling the cops that night Dad died. I convinced myself you'd destroyed my life, made me a killer, taken away any chance I had at being normal. But the truth is, I was already destroyed long before that night. Dad broke something in me every time he came home drunk and violent, every time Mom made excuses for him, every time I had to protect you and her and pretend everything was fine. You calling the police didn't make me a killer. It made you a survivor who did what you had to do to keep us all safe. I'm sorry I couldn't see that. I'm sorry I tried to make you pay for saving us. I'm sorry I hurt your girls. They didn't deserve what I put them through, and neither did you. I hope someday you can forgive me, but I'd understand if you can't. I can't even forgive myself. Your brother, Tommy. I read it 3 times, then put it in a drawer and went back to preparing dinner. Forgiveness wasn't something I could decide in an afternoon, wasn't a switch I could flip because he'd finally taken responsibility. But maybe someday, when the wounds weren't so fresh and the nightmares didn't wake my daughters crying anymore, I could think about what it meant to let go of anger before it turned into poison. The girls and I were settling into our new life, building something real and honest from the ashes of everything we'd lost. Emma was taking swimming lessons and making friends with a girl from her class who lived down the street. Charlotte had joined the school's theater program and discovered she loved performing, loved being on stage where she could channel her dramatic instincts into something creative instead of manipulative. And I was learning to trust again, slowly, carefully, starting with myself. I met someone, eventually, a divorced dad named Ben who ran a bookstore in town and had no interest in society parties or maintaining appearances. He made me laugh. He listened to my daughter's stories about their day like they mattered. He didn't try to fix me or change me or mold me into someone I wasn't. On our 4th date, I told him everything about James and Tommy and the fire, and when I finished, he just said, "That's a hell of a thing to survive. Your girls are lucky to have you." No judgment, no pity, just acknowledgement that I'd been through something terrible and come out the other side. 2 years after the trial, Grace called to tell me James was being released early for good behavior. He'll be on parole, can't contact you or the girls, can't leave Massachusetts, but I wanted you to know he's out in case that changes anything for you. I thought about it for exactly 5 seconds. It doesn't. He made his choices, I made mine. We're done. Good, Grace said, because between you and me, you're the strongest client I've ever had. Most people would have crumbled under what you went through. You turned it into something better. After I hung up, I looked around our little house with its secondhand furniture and kitchen table perpetually covered in the girls' art projects, and I understood what she meant. I had built something better, not bigger or more expensive or more impressive to people who measured worth in square footage and stock portfolios, but better in the ways that actually mattered. My daughters knew they were loved. They knew they were safe. They knew their mother would fight through fire to protect them, literally if necessary. That night at dinner, Charlotte announced she'd gotten the lead in the school play. Emma had made the swim team. I'd sold my first painting at the gallery, a small watercolor of the harbor that a tourist had fallen in love with. We celebrated with ice cream and too much laughter, and somewhere between Charlotte's dramatic reenactment of her audition and Emma's description of her race times, I realized I was happy. Not performing happiness for an audience, not faking it until I made it, but genuinely, completely happy in a way I'd never been in the townhouse on Mount Vernon Street, with all its expensive trappings and hollow relationships. The moral of my story isn't complicated. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is also the thing that sets you free. Tommy tried to burn down my life, and instead he burned away everything that was keeping me trapped.
James tried to take my children, and instead he showed them exactly who he was. Victoria tried to replace me, and instead she lost everything she'd schemed to steal. And I, who'd spent 12 years trying to be perfect for people who didn't value me, learned that the only perfection that matters is the kind you build with honesty and love, and the courage to start over when everything falls apart. My daughters will grow up knowing their mother survived betrayal and conspiracy and literal fire to keep them safe. They'll know that strength doesn't mean never falling down. It means getting back up every single time. They'll know that family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up when everything's burning and holds your hand through the flames. And they'll know, because I'll make sure they know, that their worth has nothing to do with their address or their father's money or what other people think of them. On Emma and Charlotte's 10th birthday, 3 years after we moved to Portland, I took them back to Boston for the first time. We didn't go to Mount Vernon Street or any of the old places. Instead, we went to Southie, to the neighborhood where I grew up, and I showed them the apartment building where Tommy and I had lived with our parents. It was smaller than they'd imagined, dingier, the kind of place they couldn't picture their mother coming from. "This is where I learned to be strong," I told them, standing on the sidewalk while traffic rushed past. "This is where I learned that you can survive things that should break you, and you can build something better from the pieces. Your Uncle Tommy learned something different here. He learned to be angry and bitter and to blame other people for his pain. Same neighborhood, same circumstances, completely different choices." "Why are we here, Mom?" Emma asked, holding my hand. "Because I want you to understand something important. Where you come from doesn't determine where you end up. The choices you make, the way you treat people, the love you build and protect, that's what matters." Tommy and I started in the same place and ended up completely different because of the choices we made. You two are going to have your own choices to make, and some of them will be hard and some of them will hurt. But I want you to always remember, you get to choose who you become. We had lunch at a diner I remembered from childhood, then drove back to Portland, back to our real home, the one we'd built together. And that night, tucked into their beds, Emma and Charlotte asked me to tell them a story, and for the first time, I told them mine. Not this sanitized version where Mommy married a prince and lived happily ever after, but the real story about a girl from Southie who married money and lost herself and nearly lost everything that mattered before she found her way back to who she really was. "So the moral is that Uncle Tommy was the villain?" Charlotte asked when I finished. "No, baby. The moral is that everybody's the hero of their own story, but the difference between a hero and a villain is what you do when life hurts you. Do you learn from it and grow, or do you let it poison you until you hurt other people? Uncle Tommy chose poison. I chose to keep going, to protect you two, to build something better. And you'll have to make that same choice someday, probably more than once. I can't make it for you, but I can show you that it's possible to survive betrayal and come out stronger." Years later, when my daughters were grown and building their own lives, Emma would tell people that her mother was the strongest person she'd ever known. Charlotte would say I taught her that revenge is empty, but survival is victory. And I would look at the lives they built, the choices they made, the way they loved fiercely and honestly, without performing or pretending. And I would know that everything I survived, every fire I walked through was worth it for this. Raising daughters who understood that your worth isn't determined by your worst day or your biggest betrayal, but by how you choose to rise from the ashes and what you build from the ruins. Tommy died in prison 6 years into his sentence, a heart attack at 48 years old. They sent me notification as next of kin, and I went to the funeral alone, stood at the back of a nearly empty chapel, and said goodbye to the brother I'd loved and lost long before he set my house on fire. I forgave him, finally, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to stop carrying that weight. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean what he did was okay. It just means I wasn't going to let his choices poison my life anymore. James got out of prison and married someone else, had another chance at family that he probably ruined the same way he'd ruined ours. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances and felt nothing but pity for the woman who'd believed his lies about being changed, rehabilitated, ready to do better. Some people learn from their mistakes, others just get better at hiding them. Victoria lost everything in legal fees and restitution, ended up working retail in a town where nobody knew who she used to be. I ran into her once, years later, at a conference in Boston. She tried to apologize, tried to explain, but I just walked away. She'd made her choices, I'd made mine. There was nothing left to say. And me? I built a life that was smaller in all the ways that don't matter and bigger in all the ways that do. I married Ben 5 years after we met, a simple ceremony on the beach with Emma and Charlotte.
Charlotte as our witnesses. We combined our families, his 2 boys and my 2 girls, and built something messy and real and honest. I still painted, still worked at the gallery, still remembered where I came from and what I'd survived. But mostly I was just Mom. Just Madeline, just a woman who'd learned that the greatest revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you, it's building a life so full of love and purpose that they become irrelevant. The last time I thought about Tommy and James and Victoria and everything they'd tried to take from me, I was sitting on our back porch, watching the sun set over the water. Ben was grilling dinner. The kids were playing some complicated game involving a soccer ball and rules only they understood. And I realized that this, right here, was the revenge Tommy had never understood was possible. I was happy. Genuinely, completely, freely happy in a way I'd never been when I was performing perfection for people who didn't deserve my effort. They'd tried to burn me down, and I'd risen from the ashes and built something beautiful. That was the real ending to my story, the only ending that mattered. Not in a courtroom or a prison sentence or anyone getting what they deserved, but in a simple moment of peace and joy with people I loved and who loved me back, real and true and free from all the lies that had nearly destroyed us. They lost, and I won, and the victory was sweeter than any revenge I could have plotted, because it meant I got to live fully while they stayed trapped in the prisons they'd built for themselves. And my daughters got to grow up knowing that survival is the best revenge, and love is the only thing worth fighting for. And sometimes the worst betrayal in your life is just the beginning of your real story. Don't leave without commenting where you're watching from. I notice every message. I'm thankful you shared this time with me, so please subscribe to stay connected. I'll return with another story shortly. Until then, stay grounded and keep believing.